welcome to Snowpal Software Development Architecture Podcast. In this video, we're going to take a look at one of Snowpal's APIs, the Custom Attribution API. As you probably know, one of the products that we have is a suite of APIs. I call it one product because it's one category of products, but it's a number of APIs with thousands of endpoints. In this video, we'll just talk about one of those APIs and just take an example, talk about how you might have to build something if you did not have access to those APIs, to that API, sorry, and how much time, effort, money, and risk you could actually potentially save if you did integrate the custom attribution API and hit the ground running. So without further ado, let me share my actual screen here. Okay, so you can go to customattributionapi.snowpal.com with custom attribution API being dash delimited. It's typically the way our Postman collection DNS custom domain URL works. You can also go check out our developer documentation at developers.snowpal.com. We've seen the product managers, product owners like to start with the developer documentation here. Sometimes the developers want to just skip and go straight to Postman because they are sometimes some developers want to just discover the endpoints as they go. Again, to each our own. Pick whatever works best for you. The custom attribution API. What is the essence of this API? To explain that, let me go to our web app. Instead of going to snowpal.com because it's production data, I'm just going to a local version of it, but you can sign up on snowpal.com, download the mobile apps, and check out whatever we're going through for yourself. So let's say I go here and I go into one of the resources. We have multiple levels of content hierarchy, but let's go to one of the resources that I used for one of the previous videos. There's a number of attributes here. There's block ID, there is name, there's description. This form has simple description, tags, flag. There's a drop down list of values, associated attributes where you pick a scale, food rating, and then you can pick whatever the other food rate, the scale value is. So those are related attributes. That's why you see the grouping here. You have due dates, start and end date, kind of a grouping. You have toggles, you have attachments, checklists, comments, list of comments and notes. Comments and notes are similar yet different because notes are private to you. Comments are shared with anyone else you collaborate with. Attachments is what it says it is. So those are some attributes. There's two ways to implement this. Someone said, Krish, go ahead and implement this as a React or a Flutter UI developer. I'm going to be like, okay, sure. I need to create a form with a bunch of attributes, and I need to persist them by calling an API, an endpoint or two or more, but essentially by calling an API in the backend. But if I had to, depend on the UI team, API team to actually build this, provide a specification, implement it, or give me a stubbed out set of endpoints in the meantime, I can still do it. But it's not going to be optimal because, again, it takes the API team, depending on how much or how broad and how generic they want for this to be, it's going to take them that much more time to actually get this working. And it's not necessarily the easiest of things to do. Because you want to provide customer value by creating and publishing this feature. What is the point in actually spending time and energy and effort and money, staffing and hiring a backend team if you don't have one, or having the backend team that you might already have do something that's already out there and have them reinvent the wheel? Wouldn't they be better off actually working to solving your core customer problems that essentially relate closer to your unique selling propositions? I would think so. So for a number of reasons, and plus, when you have these stubbed out endpoints, I've seen that when it comes to integration, when the API is actually available, hell, tends to sometimes break loose. So there's a lot more work that needs to happen at the time of integration. And it's expected, you budget and allocate time for it, but all of that is not the best way to spend your time and effort, not certainly in 2024. So with that premise set, hopefully you get the context. So let's take a look at this API and what value it provides. First thing is different attribute types. So let's draw, just to take the time to digest some of what we're talking. It helps if we actually drew it out. Custom attribution API. What are some attributes? There's a text attribute, number, date, file. So let's list it here. These are all the attribute types it actually does support. that list is bound to increase, but for now you have text. Again, you have date, you have number, file, single select, multi-select. Okay, file, single select, multi-select, and then the last one is nested single select. We will not go into the details of these attributes. We'll probably cover that in a subsequent video. Nested single select, because this is a pretty comprehensive API. It's 35 endpoints, but it's a lot of functionality packed into those 35 endpoints. Let me maybe change the color of these three. Okay. Okay, let's just drop some arrows here. These 7 attributes form the, oops, oh, because I grouped it. Let me actually ungroup it. These 7 attributes form the fundamental building blocks of the custom attribution API. So again, text is like an attribute such as this, where you can enter alphanumeric text. That's what you'd use the text attribute for. You have date. We saw start date, end date, and due date. That'd be date attributes. Number. Well, I think we didn't have a direct straight up number attribute as an example here, but I think maybe if you go pricing points, maybe not, maybe ratings from 1 to 5. I mean, that's a number that you enter. So that's a number attribute, even though it's a grouped attribute. And then you have file. We saw file attachments here, that we can upload attachments and files. And then we have single select. These are really powerful attributes. Single select is, like the one we just saw. You have a block tab, you can select one of them. That's a single select. Next is multi-select. I don't know if you have multi-select here, but if you actually, well, tags are sort of multi-select if you add tags. It depends on how you present it, but you can treat them as multi-select attributes. So I'm going to say hello, I'm going to say world. It's not multi-select from a drop-down, so it's different, but you can imagine this drop-down allowing you to select more than one attribute. That would be the truest form of multi-select. Nested single select is the most complex of our attributes. We again absorb all the complexities, so implementation becomes super simple for you. Let me make sure I'm recording. Okay. What is a simple example of a nested single select? Let's say you're creating a location attribute, right? Let's say we create a location attribute. A location typically tends to have it has a country, right? So let's say I'm going to say a country could be USA, state, I live in state of Virginia, and then city, right? The city I live in. So that's a location attribute. And again, you can imagine that there could be country, state, and there could also be county, and then city or municipality, district, depending on the part of the world you live in. That's a multi-select because, depending on the country, you're going to show a list of states and list of counties in that state and list of cities in that county and so on and so forth. Imagine implementing a nested single select attribute, a generic one at that. Even if it's not a generic one, your API team will have to do some work. They can kind of hard code the structure to a large extent if you're only doing it for one as location. But if you have more multi-selects, then that's going to, you're going to have to mimic that. Hopefully you have a design pattern, you still have to mimic it and implement it, do it one more time, and then the third time, and so on. If you had an attribute that's really an endpoint that's readily available like this one, imagine how easy your life could be. Here we have fast food restaurants. I think as an example, it's McD, Wendy's, and then I guess we have, I guess I'm trying to see what our example we have actually. the restaurants, and then we have a state, cities, and city underneath it. This is actually nested single select. This is the most complex one of them. Before I get to it, I'm just talking about, okay, let me step back. The nested single select is a single endpoint, but it does a number of things. This representation here gives you a combination of many different things you could potentially do. Again, I don't want to make it the most complex in this first recording. Your attributes or your forms can have pretty complex attributes. The idea behind us supporting these endpoints is to support the broad spectrum of your requirements. But for the one we're looking at, this is this is a nested attribute. But let me say this: country is a list of countries. Is a number of There's only a finite number of countries. Each country, if we take the US, we have a finite number of states. It's 50. And each state has a finite number of counties, and a county has a finite number of cities. Now, you might have country, state, and county as something coming from another API. Let's say you're consuming a GET API or GET endpoint, somebody returns a list of countries and states. Perhaps there isn't one for city, so you have a text field where people can enter the city. So you have 3 levels, you have 4 levels actually. The first 3 are single selects, but the fourth one is a free text field that you type. Or you could have a fourth field that is a number in some other case, or you could have multi-selects along the way, like your final attribute could be a multi-select as well, because you're letting somebody select, you're letting somebody select more than one city in that county. We have support for all of them in this custom attribution API, right? So you have to first create that custom attribute, give it a name, give it your options, customize it, so you're defining this literally a custom attribute that fits into the requirements of your form, the page or the screen that you're creating. That's the first thing you do. Once you do that, you can then, we have fetch attributes by ID, by name, and updating an attribute, etc. Now you can, there are certain rules. You can update an attribute so long as it's not already being used by a resource. Or you could have a rule that says it's all right if somebody is using if that attribute becomes part of a resource and somebody create a resource and assigned a value to it, I might still let somebody modify, but it may not make sense. So we have some checks and balances there, because imagine adding somebody associated a rating scale and then you got rid of that scale altogether. What's going to happen to the existing resource that's an instance that's using that particular attribute? So there are rules. So there's data integrity and data validity. But the idea is to make it so simple that you can literally create any forms in really, really quick time, whether you're building a mobile app or a web app or a microservice, by relying on the endpoints provision, made available by this API. Let's look at something else, attribute bags. Now you can create a bag of attributes. Now let's imagine that you created an attribute, let's say block ID, name, and description, right? Let's write it down here. Let me draw a line. And I'm going to say, actually, yeah, you know what? Let's add a, okay, we're going to use this for the example. Oh, I just want to move this. Okay. Doesn't let me move it. That's weird. Okay. Just going to call it custom attribution API. Okay, the first thing you do, integration, let's call it integration steps. You say you create custom attributes as required by the form, page, or screen you're working on implementing. You pick the appropriate attributes. Now, if you want, what is a bag? Attribute bag. It's, as it says, it's a bag of attributes. So let's, in this example here, we have name, description, and simple description. Let's take that. Name, description, and then simple description. You can create a, you can create a list of attributes, and then you can choose not to use a bag, And then you can go associate the bag, hang on, associate attribute bags to resource, add or update attribute values by bag ID. Let me see. I'm looking for one because we also you can. I'm trying to think. We also have support, so you don't actually have to have a bag to, if memory serves me right, to associate the attributes with the resource. Um, I have to. I'm trying to recollect here because what if I just wanted to not even have a bag? I have to go back and look at the spec again. We have lots of APIs and thousands of endpoints, and we implemented this a few months back. So I'm trying to think whether there is an endpoint that lets you actually associate an attribute directly to a resource. There may be one, but if there isn't one, you have a way to associate a bag to a resource. You will create a bag with just a single attribute. In this case, we happen to have like 3 different attributes. And let's say we create a bag called bag of attributes. We create bag. And let's call it, I don't know. I'm just going to give it a simple name and description as the name of that bag. The reason you create the bag is, what if I want to associate the same group of attributes to multiple resources? I shouldn't have to handpick each one of them every single time. It's not the most efficient way of doing this. So the idea behind providing supporting attribute bags, you create a bag of attributes. Now I can have a complete bag of these attributes because we have multiple resource types that actually have a lot of these attributes in common. There are differences as well, but there are a lot of them in common. So imagine having to add them every single time. That's going to be painful. It's not the most optimal. So you create a bag with all of these attributes, and then you can drop that bag, associated, that bag with blocks, with pods, which are our content. We have 3 levels of content in our hierarchy on the Snowpal web app. That is, using an API, you can create infinite levels of content. It doesn't have to ever end. So the first level is called key, the second is block, and third is pod. In our case, so key, blocks and pods have a lot of these attributes in common. So I can create a bag with those attributes and then associate bag or bags to resources. That's the idea. Now you've actually created a bunch of attributes, created bags. You can have multiple bags with a combination of these attributes, and then you associate them to blocks. Every time you go to create a block, all of these attributes become part of that resource. That is literally the idea. Now, remember I said we've packed a complex set of functionality into 35 endpoints. It took a lot of thinking, and the idea behind that is to code Einstein. I think one of Albert Einstein's code is, it takes a lot of effort to make things simple. I'm paraphrasing the code, but that's the idea, if I'm not wrong. So we've tried to absorb the complexity so it's easy for you. You can just go implement, any levels of these attributes. And again, in the subsequent videos, we'll dig deeper into the nested attribute here, the nested single select. It can get as complex as you want for it to be. Imagine having relationships between attributes and making them part of a group, and have some rules associated with that group. You don't have to do most, if any of it, because we provide them to you out of the box. All that you have to do is create a scale, for instance, give it a name, create scale values. Each of these scales, you can see there's different values. Satisfaction levels are love it, like it, and not for me. At the same time, if I go to I don't know, A to F grades, there's a different list of values. This is nested attributes. There's 2 levels of nesting. Again, our nesting supports n levels of nesting, so it can be as complex as you need for it to be. We took one that was up to 4 levels. I can think of others that can be a little bit more than them. But the majority of your nesting, and it's like the 80-20 rule, I reckon it's somewhere between 3, maybe even 4 levels, but mostly 3. There'll be some that are a lot more and others fewer. You can actually create those, define associate values with them, and then your attribute is good to go. Add it to a bag, associate the bag to a resource, and your UI team can start consuming it. Now, all of this is readily available. All that you have to do is go to aws.snowpal.com, go look for the custom attribution API. After a couple of clicks, you can sign up, get the API key and the product code. You'll in an email within the first 5 minutes, and then you start using them to making these requests. It's as simple as that. Now, if we've also have clients who like the functionality, but they want it to be provisioned in their infrastructure, be it Google Cloud, Azure, or AWS. That's entirely doable. It's something we support. So we'll give provision our services in your infrastructure by creating a private offer. So you have complete control over not just your data, but the whole request as well. Even some other clients have said, hey, you know what, we actually want to make this part of our infrastructure, but not even, whether we have it in the data center or the cloud, none of all of that should be transparent to you. So we want to be able to license this API, so we support that too. So you can license the API, purchase the upgrade license, so we get the upgrades and bug fixes and enhancements and features. And so we wouldn't even know where it is being, which, how you're running it, how you're using it. You're not paying by request or subscription. You basically purchase a license, make it part of your deployment, part of your DevOps or platform engineering teams, and you go from there. That's left to you. So we support multiple licensing models. That's the gist of it. The way we recommend you get started, again, it's a lot of it is self-serve, but some customers do need a little bit of assistance at least to get going. So we have professional services for each of these APIs. So you can purchase them on AWS Marketplace, so it becomes part of your single consolidated billing. Or if you want us to put together a private offer, we are happy to do that as well. So this is again the custom attribution API. There's articles that we have on products.snowpal.com. If you can go to API, you can filter and look through. We have a number of articles related to APIs, and some speak to the custom attribution API. Now that's sort of a high level overview. And if you had the API and versus not having it, you can imagine your UI team wouldn't have to wait on drops from the API team. You don't need stubbed out endpoints. They don't need to, stubbed out endpoints is okay, but it's painful because you're going to call it, you can start building it, but when you go to integration, you're going to find a lot more gaps and issues that you have to address. And that's a risk that you can avoid. If you can avoid it, why not avoid it? And that is literally the idea behind us publishing these APIs as fundamental building blocks. There's a lot more we could talk about about the specifics of these attributes, but I actually think we might be better served if we sort of defer that to the subsequent recordings. But take a look at these endpoints. If you have questions, let us know. Look at them in the context of our developer documentation. We also have SDKs published for our APIs. We have Golang SDKs, but that list is, we are beginning to support other languages. That's in our roadmap for this year, TypeScript or whatnot. So you can go to like custom attribution SDK. It'll take you to the it'll take you to package go.dev, and you can look through our examples and recipes and whatnot. So this SDK, we have an SDK in Go, like I said, for all of our APIs. Okay, I think that's a fair point to end this first video. Hopefully that answers some questions for you about our custom attribution API. If you have more, definitely hit us up. Talk to you soon. Bye bye.